there is a deep desire for black people to search for their history.
Sometimes I just think this quest for identity, you know, what aspect of your identity are you searching for?
When we look at films like The Gods of Egypt and we see Pharaoh Ramses and all of the Egyptians, they're all white, but in your mind, you know, you're like, wait, hold on. This is based in Africa.
In every generation, there's always an accompanying tag phrase to communicate the need for cultural and contextual awareness. Back in my day, the tag phrase was, boy, you better recognize. But today, the tag phrase is being woke, or simply woke. This is a phrase that we as a culture have received from the conscious community, those that consider themselves to be woke. Now, when they use this word, what they're really saying is that one really has to be asleep not to realize that racism and classism is still alive and well today. And it was racism that stripped the African of its identity via the Atlantic slave trade. And it was classism that marred the image of the identity that same African received post the Emancipation Proclamation. And it is this marred image of who we are as Africans that has us searching for our stolen identity. And it is in this quest for identity that many blacks have not turned to the church, but have walked away from her right into the arms of philosophies that they feel they can better identify with, because they've been told that seeking cultural identity is a bad thing. Now listen, just because someone is pro-black, it does not mean that they are anti-white. So although it's not necessarily a bad thing, our identity cannot be defined by our culture alone. In other words, we exist not simply to celebrate our blackness, but to celebrate the one that gave us our blackness. We exist for the glory of God, not just for our social, economic, political, or even our spiritual empowerment. You see, God created us just like we are, red, black, white, and yellow, to be his hands and his feet within the culture. And listen, here's what I got a problem with. And this is the biggest myth that we've been told. And that is Christianity is a white man's religion. And this is due to the fact that oftentimes as a Christian community, we tend to herald folks like Luther and Calvin. And see, when we pick up church history at the Reformation, we miss some of the rich contributions of folks like St. Augustine and Athanasius and Tertullian and Origen, all who were African as well as Christian. That's right, Steve. Men from Africa help shape how we engage in philosophy, theological thought, and even apologetics. But when one is seeking identity and doesn't know or is unfamiliar with facts like these, it's easy to fall in love with philosophies like Pan-Africanism, which is the idea that people of African descent have common interests and should be unified, because for them, unity is vital to economic, social, political progress, because the aim is not just to unify, but to also uplift. Pan-Africans believe that no matter where you are in the world, if you have roots in Africa, we all share a common history and a common destiny. But listen, y'all, the problem with Pan-Africanism is it stops just shy of the goal. Yes, it helps us reclaim the cultural identity we lost in slavery and segregation, but it has been unable to communicate and connect us to the rich index we have in church history. So many leave the church in search of a philosophy that honors their cultural or identifies with their cultural context, because for many, identity is important. Identity is so important to the black culture that not long ago, theaters across this globe were filled with black folks dressed in African attire shouting with black pride, Wakanda forever. Because they wanted to identify with the Black Panther, because the movie communicated an experience in which they could identify with and wanted to identify with. That's why it's imperative to communicate the historical data that connects us to biblical history. Now, here's the funny thing. Even in biblical history, we find tag phrases being used to communicate the need for cultural and contextual awareness. It's right there in the text, 1 Chronicles 12:32, which says, the sons of Issachar understood the times and knew what Israel ought to do. Notice the connection between understanding the times and knowing what to do. In other words, a proper understanding of culture, of the culture in which we lived, it was key for them to obtain wisdom they needed to know what to do. So being woke, watch this, y'all. Being woke is knowing who you are, historically, contextually, and currently, so that you can avoid being lulled to sleep by the multiplicity of cultural philosophies. Now, I gotta go, but stay woke.